Hello there, fellow Zen heads. Today, we're going to be talking about CRM blueprints, what they're used for, how to set them up, and some best practices. So a blueprint is a way for you to control the processes that your employees inside of the CRM are able to do and follow for a given module and following a specific outlined process or flow that you want them to follow. One of the most common ways that we use blueprints are in the deals module with control of the stage field. Now, if we go into a deals module, we have our stage bar across the top with all of our different stages from qualification down to closed won and closed lost. By default, all of the stages are visible at all times. You can switch from one stage to another. You may have some layout rules that require some fields to be mandatory. Then in addition, you can hop back and forth between any of these. I could move a deal from closed won all the way back to qualification instantly. Now, let's say you don't want that to be able to happen. You want to control that people can only move from one stage to another stage, or move from one stage to maybe one of two different stages, and they can only do so when they follow specific protocols. And you want certain automations triggered, like email notifications, either to yourself or your customers. We're going to use blueprints for setting that up and kind of locking down the process that these records can go through. So the way that we're going to get to the blueprint creation screen is by going to Settings, and here under Process Management, we have Blueprint. I'll click on that. You might have some example blueprints in your system already, or you may have a completely blank system. When you go to create a blueprint, you need to give the blueprint a name. Then you need to select what module it's going to be on. We'll stick with the example of deal stages because, again, it's a very common one that we see a lot of people use. Choose which layout this particular blueprint should be on. Blueprints are layout specific. And then finally, you must choose a field that the blueprint is based on. So what you're going to find is that we need some kind of pick list that we are going to be able to pick from, because the values in that pick list are going to be the different stages or states that our record can be in. Obviously, the most commonly used is deal stage. In the case of a deal stage, we do also need to choose what pipeline we want. I'll go ahead and leave it on standard. You can also add additional criteria for whether or not a record should or shouldn't be in a blueprint. Let's say I want this to be my big deal blueprint, that this is the way that my deals that are over a $5,000 amount should be handled. I'll call this my big deal process. And I will say that if the amount is greater than $5,000, or we'll say greater than or equal to, then I need to follow this process. That way, any smaller deals that are only maybe a couple $100s, we don't need to be as strict or stringent with those. You can also decide whether or not this is a continuous blueprint, which means that you create a sequence of transitions, each of which will be triggered the moment the transition preceding it was completed. This is best suited for building call agent scripts. It's almost like setting up a wizard where your transitions will execute one right after another. We're not going to get into that today. We're going to keep it simple with just a regular blueprint, one that goes step by step and requires manual triggering from your employees. Oh, got rid of the amount. Put that back in. Here we are at the blueprint creation screen. To start with, I have a blank canvas here. It wants me to drag and drop states. So you notice that the available states are all of the different values for my stage pick list. Qualification, trial active, trial expired, negotiation review, closed won, etc. So I need to select what are the different states that I want a deal to be able to move through in this blueprint. Now, maybe that's all of these stages, but maybe for a particular blueprint, certain stages are not ever going to be used, right? You could Like we set up a criteria that the amount had to be over $5,000, you could set up like a deal type pick list and have different blueprints for deals of different types, determining which types of stages different types of deals should go into. For now, let's keep it simple by let's drop in qualification. Let's put in proposal, price quote, negotiation and review, closed won, implementation, and then the unfortunate incident of if it is closed, lost. So now that I have these states here, I need to connect them. What is the way that you can get from one stage to another? And that's going to be through what we call a transition. So now if I come over to one of these states, you'll notice all these little bubbles. This is where I can start to drag a connection from one state to another. So if I want to move from qualification to proposal and price quote, I'm going to drag an arrow from qualification to proposal and price quote. You see it's created a connection here with a plus sign, prompting me to create a transition. So I will click on that plus button, and I have to give my transition a name. So where the states are more adjectives or nouns, right? Qualification, proposal, negotiation, closed won. It's describing what the deal is at that moment. A transition is more of a verb, right? You're moving from one state to another. If I'm moving from qualification to proposal or price quoting, then this transition would be send proposal or move to proposal. I'm going to go ahead and call it send proposal because that's the action that I'm going to be taking moving from qualification to proposal and price quote. You can select parallel or automatic transitions to determine whether or not this transition should happen along with other transitions as well, or an automatic transition if you want this transition to automatically occur after a certain amount of time. So they have some examples down here. You can wait for 10 days, otherwise trigger the order is completed, or wait for 3 business days, otherwise trigger that the customer is not responding transition. We'll go ahead and just leave this as a manual transition for now. So I'll click on save, and now I'm here on my transition editor. So here I have 3 different options: before, during, and after. Before is where I am setting the criteria for who should have access to this transition, whether or not they can move a deal from qualification to proposal or price quote. By default, the record owner is the person who can initiate that transition. You can click on this box here to select additional users, either individual users or roles, or people from certain groups, or members of portals. You can also add additional criteria as to whether or not this transition is available. So let's say you wanted to require that a file upload field with a proposal PDF had to be populated in order to move to this send proposal state. Then you could add that criteria of that field should not be null. During is where we can add actions that will happen as the record is being edited and moved from one stage to another. So this might be requiring fields, making some fields mandatory. For example, the amount field should definitely be already filled in. Obviously, I guess it should already be filled in this case because we put amount as a qualification for getting into the blueprint. Maybe something else is like a budget type. I have to select from another pick list a budget type. So I could say that this field on the deals module, and I'll say type, that now is a mandatory field. That has to be filled in. If it's already filled in, then we'll just move on over to the next state of proposal and price quote. But if it has not been filled in, then I will have a little pop-up show up to make that appear. And you can mark it as mandatory or optional. You can also add a validation rule, right? If the type, has to contain something or shouldn't contain another thing, you could put that criteria here so that when somebody tries to enter in that mandatory value, that it is adhering to your process's standards. Additional actions you can take here, you can add tags. You can simply post an info message to an individual. You can add associated items like a note or an attachment, a task, any other related records like a sales order or any custom modules. Those will also appear. You can trigger a checklist that somebody has to sort of confirm that they have completed certain elements, attesting that they have done everything they need to do in order to move in this transition. If you have a widget that one of your developers has built, you can trigger that to appear during this transition. Or a kiosk similar to a widget. Kiosk, if you've never used the Kiosk Studio before, we have some great videos on those, but it's sort of like a wizard where you can move between screens, filling in pieces of information, looking at related records. In any case, you can trigger one of those here. And then finally, we have after, where after the record has been saved and we have actually moved from qualification into proposal, then we have all these follow-up actions that can be taken, right? You can set an email notification to go out to the deal owner or an email notification to go out to an associated contact. You can create tasks, meetings, update a field, create a new record of some kind in another module. You can, if you are more technically savvy, you can initiate a webhook to an outside part of your system. You can initiate a custom action, which is just triggering a custom function inside of your functions library. And then you can also add tags after the fact, or remove tags that maybe shouldn't be there anymore if it has moved into a certain state. And so then you repeat this process for the whole of your deal flow. So let's actually go back and take a look at one that I already have made up, sort of Julia Child style. So here I have a blueprint called Standard Sales Process. You see that I move from qualification to needs analysis to proposal price quote, send proposal. And then here after negotiation review, I either will transition to closed lost or I'll transition to closed won. Inside of each of these transitions, I have certain fields being marked as mandatory, and I have tasks that are automatically being generated. So now that we've built this in here, let's take a look and see what does it look like in an actual deal record. So here we are on a deal. As you can see, my stage bar is still up here. I'm not in the blueprint yet, and that's because we're not adhering to that criteria that we put in the entry criteria of the blueprint of the amount has to be $5,000 or greater. So let's go ahead and change this amount from $1 to $6,000. So I'll go ahead and save that. And you can see that my screen is refreshed. And now my record has these two buttons on it, Qualify Deal and Closed Lost. So these are the available transitions at this point in the record. So let's say I click on Qualify Deal, right? I want to move from qualification to needs analysis. I'm going to click on Qualify Deal. And now we have the mandatory fields that were set by the during actions inside of the blueprint, right? So these budget, time frame to complete, and deal type, those were all defined back in the Qualify Deal during section. So then I will go ahead and fill this out. Say they have a budget of 25 million. Time frame to complete, I'll select a date. Let's go ahead and give ourselves a year for that. And select the deal type as a new build. So you can see that now my current state or my deal stage is needs analysis, and I have new transitions here, complete analysis and closed lost. We've also added in a task has been associated to this deal, schedule needs analysis team. Now, one thing you might be asking, Greg, why is the closed lost button there? When we were looking at the blueprint, you should only be able to go from negotiation review to closed lost through the closed lost transition. How come I can see it on the needs analysis section? And that's because the closed lost has been marked as a common transition. You'll notice as I'm hovering over the closed lost, you see these green arrows coming from other segments, as well as seeing a big old C next to the closed lost name. So if I click on that, you can see that there is a checkbox here called Common Transition. If a transition is labeled as a common transition, that means that you can set up that transition should be accessible from other parts of the blueprint. So in the case of closed lost, very commonly we will mark that as a common transition because unfortunately, a deal could go wrong for any number of reasons and you could lose the sale at any point in that process. So rather than creating a bunch of manual transitions of, well, it could go from qualification to closed lost, or it could go from needs analysis to closed lost, or it could go from proposal price quote to closed lost. We'll just mark it as a common transition on these states. So not closed won. We have it on qualification, needs analysis, and proposal price quote. So that transition would be available throughout the process here. You'll notice if we continue through and filling in more values here, and you see I require an attachment here of some kind. That now, when I move into the closed won, you saw that we did not have closed lost set as a common transition. So now when I click on closed won and I confirm my amount, hit the save button, you'll see that now I've exited the blueprint because I reached the end of this pathway. If we set closed lost as a common transition to closed won, then that means that once you reach closed won, it would be stuck in that blueprint seemingly forever unless it moved to closed lost. That would mean that the only way to get a deal out of that blueprint would be moving it to closed lost. All right, so let's start to recap. A blueprint is a way for you to control the flow of a salesperson's process of interacting with records in the CRM using a pick list as the basis of that blueprint. Every value in that pick list is going to be a state that your record can exist in. In order to move that record from one blueprint state to another blueprint state, you must initiate a transition. And that transition can have criteria attached to it, enabling or disabling its availability to your users, depending on characteristics of the user who is currently logged in, or characteristics about the record, such as who the record owner is, or any other field that you can create a criteria about on the record itself. In addition, you can set mandatory fields or mandatory attachments that need to be added to the record in order to complete the transition. You could even set validation rules for those. And finally, you can set up follow-up actions, either custom functions, email notifications, webhooks, tasks, etc. And the cons about blueprints is that once a record is in a blueprint, the only way to get out of that blueprint is if either it no longer meets that blueprint's entry criteria, or you take that record all the way through a blueprint to the end of one of these flow paths. And that's the only way that that field can be updated. So even with a field update action inside of a workflow rule, let's say I set up a workflow rule to change the stage on a deal from needs analysis to proposal and price quote. If that deal is inside of this big deal blueprint that I made, that field update would fail on that workflow rule. That field can't be updated except by actual manual interaction with the blueprint or making a custom Deluge API call to hit the initiate transition API, which would do the equivalent of pressing that blue button. And if you do that, even via API, you will still have to follow all the rules of that transition, including filling in any mandatory fields or including any mandatory attachments. So, as you can see, blueprints do a lot of good. They can be a little restrictive, but if you have a well-defined process and you want to make sure that your salespeople follow a given protocol to the letter, then blueprints are an excellent way to go. Otherwise, you may want to stick with simply using layout rules or validation rules separate from a strict blueprint on the rails kind of approach. But let us know in the comments down below, which have you used more in the past, layout rules or blueprints? Have you found them to be helpful, restrictive, something in between? What kind of problems have you encountered with blueprints? Let us know in the comments and we can create some follow-up videos on it. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video or found it useful, please like and subscribe to the Zenatta YouTube channel, as well as your favorite choice of podcast app. You can also head over to Zenatta.com if you want to meet with a member of our team to talk about upgrading your Zoho system. We'd be happy to help you out. You can also go to club.zenatta.com and check out our online community there, where other Zoho members like you can interact and discuss and ask questions. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next video.